Well, greetings everybody. This is Casey with HomeSmart Realty Partners here in Northern Colorado. Hashtag not your typical real estate broker, trademark pending. Anytime I talk about the real estate industry, I'm going to talk about it from a perspective of someone who spent 4+ decades in and around construction. But today what I'd like to talk about are home inspections, home inspectors, when and why they should happen, and also licensing and regulation of home inspectors. Colorado is one of 30 states that does not require home inspectors to be licensed and regulated. I'll give you a little bit of brief history on the background of what's happened over the past 8 years. In 2015, there was a 9-year-old girl that was molested by a professional home inspector. After that point, there was a bill drafted that went to the Senate. It was SB 15-140 to be able to create a vote to license and regulate home inspectors. That bill never even made it to the floor. It was tabled indefinitely. Fast forward to 2017. The second bill was drafted by another Colorado legislator, and it was SB 17-038. Now this bill actually did come up for the vote to license and regulate home inspectors. It fell short of the votes to make that bill into law. Let's fast forward again to 2019. Now the Colorado Real Estate Commission have what they call sunrise and sunset reviews, and these are reviews put forth legislation, not just the legislation but language from the industry, sometimes from within the industry, that would like to see changes happen in real estate. So after their sunrise review in October of 2019, reading the arguments for those, they decided that home inspectors did not need licensing and regulation once again. So at this point, I'm thinking, who the hell are they protecting? Because it's not the consumer. They don't want to upset and tip the rotten apple cart that real estate has become. Because if they would change these laws, there would be a lot less litigation happening, especially with home inspections and material defects. These need to be disclosed prior to a house going on the market. It really needs to happen that way, and it shouldn't be the burden of the buyer to disclose all these things or find all these things about a property they've never lived in, where a seller has lived in it for X amount of years. So each year, we as real estate brokers have to take what they call the annual commission updates classes. 4 years ago, when I was taking the class, the instructor at that time was a 15-year managing broker approved by the Colorado Real Estate Commission to teach this class. And during the first break, he had stated that 60% of all litigation for the prior year was on failed home inspections. Me being someone who spent a lifetime in construction, I had given him my solution, which I would love to see happen, which would be anyone who wants to be a home inspector would have to go through a licensing and regulation class. For anyone who has not been in the trades, who wants to get into being a home inspector, would have to take a 2-year course, whether through a community college or something similar, would have classroom instruction and hands-on training, where they would have to spend a certain amount of time with each segment of the trades, working hands-on from concrete to cabinets. At the end of that 2 years, they would take a test, they would have to pass a test on competency based on the International Building Codes book. After I mentioned my solution for this, his response was, and I direct quote this, "Well, you don't want your home inspector to know too much." That's the mindset that I've seen in this industry, especially over the last 10 years, because why don't real estate agents want their home inspectors to know too much? Because it's going to kill that commission check at the end of the rainbow. They're upset, it's going to upset that rotten apple cart. Again, who are they protecting? Because it's certainly not the consumer. So I recently closed on a couple properties for buyers, one property in Loveland and one in Fort Collins. First property was built in 1990. The second property in Fort Collins was built in 1991. Both had identical health and safety issue, along with others that weren't disclosed, especially in the first property, on the seller's property disclosure. But the one I want to talk about today is polybutylene pipe. And it was manufactured from 1978 to 1995. It's a plastic pipe that was made in lieu of replacing copper pipe because it was less expensive to manufacture, easier to install. The solder joints weren't needed as they had plastic fittings and compression rings. So polybutylene pipe was manufactured by a few different companies. Two that I know are Shell and Vanguard. This type of pipe was put into 6 million homes across the U.S. Between 78 and 95. What happened with this type of pipe is the domestic water supplies have either chlorine contents or other chemical contents in them that make that water potable. It's treated water. And over time, what was found out that the water with these chemical contents started degrading the pipe from the inside out. So it could look perfectly healthy on the outside, and it would be deteriorating from the inside with micro cracks. So what would happen with this pipe is either they would create small leaks, minor leaks that would leak out over the course of time, many years. Sometimes there were moderate leaks where the leak would show up fairly quickly, and there are times where catastrophic leaks where this pipe would actually burst and you would have a major water damage flood on your hands. There was a class action lawsuit that was established in 1995, and there was a settlement for just shy of $1 billion for people who had this type of pipe, polybutylene pipe, in their homes, to request funds to replace that pipe in their homes. So I'm going to show you a couple here. This is PB2110 polybutylene pipe, and this is the interior type of pipe that was put into homes. It came in a gray color, a blue color, and sometimes in a milky white color. Now, prior to these copper fittings being put in, they were also made out of plastic. The same type of polybutylene plastic that the pipe was made out of, except a little bit more rigid. That's where they started failing first. This is another type. This is a sample piece I saved from the second house that I had closed on. This runs from the main water tap in through under the slab that supplied the main water supply. This one was actually made by Vanguard. So these two look very similar. On my left is polybutylene, on my right is HDPE. It's a high density polyethylene pipe, which was the replacement product for polybutylene. Let's get back to the two properties I recently closed on. The first property in Loveland was built by the contractor. He was the contractor of the home. He lived in that home. He built it himself from the time it was built to the time it was sold. He did not disclose that polybutylene was coming in from the water tap into the house, along with several other things that weren't disclosed in the seller's property disclosure that we had to dig out along the line. The second property that I had under contract for a buyer in Fort Collins, the seller had that home pre-inspected 4 months prior to it going on the market. I had asked for that inspection report along with the sewer scope and the radon report. When I read through that inspection report, listed in there, the inspector had found that it had polybutylene coming into the property. It too was not listed in the seller's property disclosure, and it was not disclosed by the listing agent. For decades, the general practice of the real estate industry has been for the buyer, once under contract, to hire a home inspector and have that home inspected for any type of health and safety defects that would be incurred costs for the buyer to absorb once the property closes. It is one of the most idiotic rules that the real estate industry has never changed, and there are several that could be changed to make it a more fair and equitable type of a system for consumers involved all the way around. Why is it that the burden of responsibility is on the buyer's shoulders as opposed to the seller's shoulders? I'll never understand that because there's really no reason and logic for that to happen. I believe a home inspection should happen prior to the house going on the market, where the seller would have to hire a licensed and regulated home inspector, licensed and regulated by the state of Colorado, to come in to look at that property, and any type of health and safety issues, material defects that would be incurred by the buyer would have to be disclosed fully in a seller's property disclosure or in a separate document, along with the listing when it went up on the market, where any buyer's agent could download that information and share it with the buyer prior to even making an offer on the property. Why should it be the buyer's responsibility to bear the burden? Because most of the time, especially in a seller's market, the seller will not give a damn about what the buyer thinks, because they'll have them lined up, and if they don't feel like they're going to get what they want for their property, they'll go next. So it always falls upon the buyer's shoulder to bear the burden of responsibility and the cost to fix these items. I think it's almost criminal that that happens that way, and it's happened that way for many, many years. So how can this be fixed? So once it would become mandatory for a seller to hire a licensed and regulated home inspector to disclose any type of material defects, health and safety issues concerned, that seller would at that point have either the ability to fix those things that are health and safety issues, and if they did, they could adjust the purchase price of the house with the upgrades that they had put the costs out for to reflect the updates in that property and the purchase price. If they decided not to fix those things, because whether they did not have the funds to fix those things or they just don't want to do it, they would have to or be required to hire licensed individuals in their respective fields, tradespeople, to get hard numbers on what those costs would be, whether it would be replacing a main line like this, which each of these properties was an estimate of $7,500. And any other things like that that were health and safety issue related, whether it's water lines, HVAC, furnaces, hot water heaters, roofs, they would take those hard numbers and based on the current market value of the property, they would deduct that from that property at the closing, where the buyer would be able to take additional funds, and lenders would actually have to set up a similar package like they do with FHA loans, where a buyer would be able to have that all those necessary requirements for health and safety issues fixed within a 6 months period post-closing. That would be the best way for this to be a more fair and balanced system of selling properties.